Je t'aime.
Je t'aime.
Je veux être avec toi.
You're the love of my life.
All Spoiler Recap.
Welcome back to the All Spoiler Recap. I'm Julia Cunningham. You know, we spoil a movie beat by beat on this podcast. We go through every single element, and I have returned after basically a year-long break, and I dived in right with our bread and butter, horror films. But I received a couple of email, which to me means that represents 1,000 people, even though it was 2 people literally, who emailed saying, I love when you do horror, but I also miss your days of Where the Crawdads Sing, or, you know, a rom-com here or there. I want some of those too. And I thought, you know what? We have been leaning in on horror, and now is a perfect time to dig in on a rom-com. And we'll get to why. Let me first introduce our guest for the week. Returning to the podcast, Ethan Stoller. Welcome back.
Hi, thanks for having me back.
Of course. He was actually, Ethan joined us for episode 102, which was a film called No Exit, which was actually not that long ago. We're only at like episode 115 or 116. But because I took a year-long break, I have not seen you on Zoom for literally like a year and a half. So, Ethan, thank you for returning my emails and coming back to the podcast.
There's nowhere I'd rather be right now.
Well, Ethan, are you ready? I gave Ethan a heads up right before the podcast began that, you know, many people may have seen in the news that the iconic figure Gena Rowlands passed away, which, by the way, I've been saying Gena Rowlands since the dawn of time, and I feel so bad that it wasn't until her death that I realized that is not how you pronounce her name. Spelled Gena, so I just assumed Gina, but it's actually short for Virginia, so she goes more like Virginia Rowlands, I guess was sort of a rolling Southern accent to that. I'm not 100% sure, but unfortunately, Gena Rowlands, like her character in a film called The Notebook, was living with Alzheimer's disease and unfortunately now has passed away at the age of 94. And, you know, so much of the internet has been exploding, especially on the site formerly known as Twitter, that people are saying the woman from The Notebook. And it's like, she's an incredible actress. She was married to John Cassavetes. There's so many, like, go watch A Woman Under the Influence, go see Gloria, Hope Floats even. But, you know, a lot of people call upon The Notebook, which, by the way, I've not seen since it was in theaters. And so I thought, wow, what a moment. Right now, we're going to recap The Notebook. Ethan, how do you feel about it?
It's I couldn't think of a more fitting tribute.
I've never fitting
seen,
tribute.
I'm the one person who hasn't seen this movie. I know it's a very famous, well-celebrated movie, so you can experience it through me as if with your fresh eyes. Right.
You know, I mean, it did sit at something like 54% on Rotten Tomatoes, which is not unusual for a rom-com to sort of have a mixed review. It is a movie that was directed by Nick Cassavetes, who is the son of John, and not only is does his wife make an appearance, his wife at that time make an appearance in the film, but of course his mother as well. And there are interesting things about it. Like, you're sort of like, when you're watching it, you're like, yeah, I can see how this swept the nation, which it was completely a word-of-mouth summer mega box office film. It was counter-programming that had incredible, strong word-of-mouth, specifically because, and you can't deny it, the chemistry between Ryan Gosling and Rachel McAdams, who ended up dating in real life, although allegedly on set, they did not get along, that they were fighting a lot, and that passion probably came through on screen. They ended up dating after the movie actually wrapped. One fascinating fact that still blows my mind that we learned basically during the various Britney documentaries that came out, as well as her own memoir, is that she was up against Rachel McAdams. It was down to Rachel McAdams and Britney Spears to play the Allie Calhoun character,
Wow.
Which is so insane, although I guess she probably had chemistry with Ryan from her days on the Mickey Mouse Club. Who knows? But I kept trying to think, like, what would Britney be doing in this scene right now? And I just could not even let my mind go there because this performance is so Rachel McAdams. But so, guys, we are going to go ahead and dig in honor of Gena Rowlands, who recently passed away. We start with a black screen and light piano as we PowerPoint dissolve to a setting sun. And we immediately get Ryan Gosling in the Allegria font, which, if you know that font, you know, because it's sort of like, imagine the sturdiness of an Arial font, but the flourishes of almost a typewriter. So the G is like the circle, the line, and then another circle with like a little dip off of the top of it. It's classy AF is what we're saying. It's sort of giving historical Southern Gothic in a way, but not that type font. It's a little bit more typewriter-esque than that. And we see this open bay of water, the water drenched in yellows and reds and oranges from this beautiful setting sun with a single rower in the water. We're getting more of our names. Rachel McAdams, James Garner, Gena Rowlands, The Notebook. In the same font, larger and in bold. We zoom in on our rower and then follow him as he makes his way through the bay, which honestly is very reminiscent of our Swamp Girl and Where the Crawdads Sing. It's giving lowlands, it's giving high grasses, it's giving probably that rowboat will get stuck in water because you think it's deep and it's actually only like 2 feet deep. It's giving that type of energy. And we just keep getting different angles. Rowboater from this angle. Now we're looking overhead, and now we're face to face with the rower. And then all of a sudden, all of these birds start flying in. Seemingly beautiful geese making their way. Again, our light just drenching the entire shot. And our rower, because obviously we need to see him. Let's see what's he's going on while we're getting all of our credits. And these white birds flying through the sky in this slow motion as we see this southern house in the distance. And then the perspective from a woman, an elderly woman, Gena Rowlands, watching said birds. Again, bathed in orange and reds from the setting sun. And then, of course, we get our based on a novel from Nicholas Sparks, who writes, quote, romantic books, end quote, and has made $1 billion, basically, thanks to this one massive hit with The Notebook, spiraling every single book he's ever touched being turned into a movie. So now a nurse approaches Gena Rowlands, who tells her, let's get you ready for bed. We cut to the end of a sunset. It's a deep purple as the rower goes into the night sky. And we see James Garner, who he himself, I didn't realize has been a decade. He died in 2014. But again, iconic sort of figure of The Great Escape with Steve McQueen, The Rockford Files, has done a little bit of everything.
Sure.
And he appears, and he's like, you know, a good close-up shot of handsome, older James Garner. And he's wearing the trendy pedophile glasses, as they're often referred to as, that are unattractive and yet sweeping the nation for celebrity women of a certain age. Like currently, like Jennifer Aniston, Gwyneth Paltrow, they're all wearing the pedophile glasses, I like to call them. They're the metal frames that are a little bit squared off. So they almost look like Ray-Bans, but they're a little bit more square. And they're like, when you see them, you think, a pedophile wears those. You know, like a stereotypical, allegedly stereotypical pedophile. Where's that sort
That's
of
not
frame?
the official name of the...
Yeah, it's not called the pedophile glasses, but you just know when you see them, you think, only a pedophile would wear those. And yet, James Garner's wearing them in The Notebook, which is odd, and so are various female celebrities currently wearing them. And we get this narration from him. I've led a common life. There are no monuments dedicated to me, and my name will soon be forgotten. But in one respect, I've succeeded as gloriously as anyone who ever lived. I've loved another with all of my heart, and for me, that has always been enough. He's seemingly in some sort of retirement community, and he gets in line with fellow elderly men to receive his medication in a paper cup. And he says to the nurse, today's the big day today. And she's like, you always say that, you old devil. I'm like, okay, you know, rapport with the nurses. And he enters Gena Rowlands' room, who is, quote, having a tough day, says her nurse. And she's been staring out the window and wants to stay inside. She's asked for her to go for a walk. And the nurse announces, James Garner, this is Duke. He's here to read to you. And he's like, why don't we just go downstairs? He leads her to this wicker-chaired sunroom. And he says to her, where did we leave off? We cut back in time to June 6th, 1940. And Noah, a.k.a. Ryan Gosling, is there, hot. And Allie, a.k.a. Rachel McAdams, beautiful, who's only 17 years old at the time. And we cut to Ryan Gosling. We're at their time frame. And he's with his friend, who he refers to as the little man, a.k.a. E from Entourage, Kevin Connolly, known for Entourage. He was also part of Leonardo DiCaprio's Posse Pussy. And more importantly, was the director of Gotti, which holds a classic 0% on Rotten Tomatoes. So, like, what a star vehicle for E from Entourage / the Pussy Posse being in The Notebook. I'd completely forgotten that he was in this film. And they're at a local fair. There's a Ferris wheel. There's one of those things where you, like, knock over the milk cartons, you know, the old milk bottles to win a prize. And the thing is like, it's 1940s. It's a very modern-looking fair. Like, either fair technology is stuck in the 1940s or they cheated and truly updated it. But they walk over to what are, quote, 1940s-style bumper cars. And there we see this girl. Who is that? Ryan Gosling says. Oh, that girl, that's Rachel McAdams. You don't know her? She's here for the summer with her family. And we cut back to her, and she is full head thrown back belly laugh. Like, ha, like having the time of her goddamn life in this bumper car. Like, she's never had fun before. It's very slow-mo shot. Like, anytime we see this, like, here's our woman and this person is going to instantly fall in love with her, it's very Sharon Stone in Casino. It's very time has stopped. It's a full beauty. And that is, like, what we're giving Rachel McAdams. And E from Entourage says, you know, her dad has more money than God. And Ryan Gosling's like, huh. And he just stares at her. And she's being jostled around in these bumper cars. Her slow motion, it's like she's being thrashed around like a rag doll because every single person, men specifically, are slamming their bumper cars into her because, of course, they, like, want to get up close to her or whatever. But it's also, like, low-grade assault. Like, why is she having to throw her body around so much in these bumper cars in slow motion? It feels like truly like low-grade assault. But she emerges from the bumper cars with her friends and a trail of men chasing after her. And she comes immediately to face with our beautiful Ryan Gosling. Want to dance with me? He says. No. Why not? Because I don't want to. And this random man pops up and is like, hey, Ryan Gosling, she's with us. And this other mustached man is like, yeah, we're going to the Ferris wheel. And she gives Ryan a real look. And she's like, yeah, the Ferris wheel. She gives him a once-over like, you wish. And she walks off. You really showed him, Rachel McAdams. So now E from Entourage's girlfriend, who, yeah, did they say her name at one point? Maybe, but we'll call her No Name because I don't remember it. No Name is cradling the tiny lamb that he won for her. And it's perfectly in sync with the pink and white dress that she's wearing. And he's like, spill the tea. This is Rachel McAdams. So clearly, even though she was like, ugh, of course I'll go to the Ferris wheel, she was also like, who is that? So she says, what's his deal? Oh, Ryan Gosling? Oh, he works down at the lumber yard with E from Entourage. Oh, she's like, huh, but did you see how close he was to me? He was standing 2 inches from my face. She's like, ugh, well, that's Ryan Gosling, though. That's what he does. I'm surprised he even came over. He doesn't just, like, chat people up, though. I mean, he must like you. Anyway, she gets on the Ferris wheel with Mustached Man. And again, 1940s, it seems like there is no safety inspection. These cars look rink-a-dink, and honestly, I wouldn't get on it. There's no barrier. There's no safety. I didn't even see them start. It was like they ran and jumped onto it and just kept going in a circle. And Ryan from afar is just staring at her, deeply in love already, which, you know, shades of red flag when it's just like, I'm obsessed with you just based on staring at your face. And he knows, though, there's an energy between them. The power of 2 14s out of 10s, Rachel McAdams and Ryan Gosling together, obviously, they're drawn to each other. So he runs. No security, no barrier. He runs and jumps into their Ferris wheel chair. Literally my nightmare. I was like, the whole thing would have toppled over. It was giving when you're on a tiny plane, a 2-seater, and they're like, sir, you need to go sit in the back because the plane's going to fall out of the sky. That was the energy of him jumping into the Ferris wheel chair. Literally my nightmare. And she's screaming and is like, don't touch me! Ryan moves to turn and then sits in between Mustache and Rachel McAdams, making the entire thing violently shake, moving forward. And the staff, the man who wasn't paying attention at all, Tommy's like, you can't do that. And Ryan Gosling yells down, I'll pay when I get down. Then he declares to her, I'm Ryan Gosling. She's like, so it's really nice to meet you. And the guy is like, who is this guy? Do you know him? What's going on? I would really like to take you out. And Ryan's arm is just forward enough that somehow he's completely blocked out Mustache Man. He's sitting in a way that his body language is fully to Rachel McAdams. Tommy again screaming, you can't sit more than 2 people in each chair. So he stops the Ferris wheel. They're up high. They're not at the very tip top. They're at 1 p.m. So they're basically shades of being at the very top. And Ryan stands up, and the entire cart again is violently shaking, and he jumps to the bar of the actual Ferris wheel. And he's dangling arms and legs just aflutter. And he turns around like Simone Biles, just right around to face them. And the random man. And he goes, so, will you go out with me? She's like, what? No! No? Why no? I don't know. Because I don't want to. Well, you leave me no other choice then. And he lets one hand go. So now he's dangling from one arm. Rachel McAdams is screaming. Everyone is freaking out. Eve from Entourage is like, just go out with him. We're all going to die. He says one more time, I'm going to ask you one more time. Will you go out with me? She's like, okay, fine. I'll go out with you. Number one, ladies, you do not have to go out with someone just because they are on the verge of breaking every bone on their body, okay? He would not drop, actually. You do not have to be bullied into going on a date. He then goes, well, don't do me any favors. So she finally screams, I want to go out with you, she declares. They finally get down, or they're about to get down. And she stands up. She's like, you think you're so smart, don't you? And then she pulls his pants down, Ethan, just to show him who's the smart one. You're not so cocky now, are you, Ryan Gosling? And he says, I'm going to get you for that. Maybe you will, maybe you won't, she says. We cut to the next day or two. And Ryan Gosling sees Rachel McAdams in this bright green, my father has more money than God dress on. And Ryan is in his disgusting lumberyard work clothes. And yet still hot, because you can't fight it. You can't cover that face in light amount of soot and not think that we can't see that flawless face. And he's like, do you remember me? Oh, Mr. Underwear? Yeah, of course I do. He's like, okay, I'm sorry, but I had to do that. I had to be next to you when I met you. We're 14 out of 10s, the two of us, and together we're unstoppable. I was just drawn to you. I was drawn to you. She just laughs. What a line. He's like, no, it's not a line. It's true. What are you doing tonight? What are you doing tomorrow? The date, you agreed to it. Well, I changed my mind. He's like, I'm crazy about you. Then they have this back and forth, and she's like, but you're trash. And he's like, okay, she doesn't exactly say that, because Ethan's face just dropped, like, how dare. But she basically is sort of like, you're not good enough. You're not taking me out. Who do you think you are energy? And he just goes full Ryan Gosling. He's like, I can be anything you want me to be. I can be smart. I can be dumb. I can be stupid. I can be whatever. And she's like, you're dumb. He's like, yeah, I can be that. So now E from Entourage and No Name decide to sneak attack set up Ryan Gosling and Rachel McAdams, because clearly all they've been doing is talking about the other. And they go inside to watch a movie, Little Abner. And E and No Name are making out the entire film. And Ryan and Rachel are sitting outside of the couple. Finally, Ryan moves over and sits next to Rachel, and he's just staring at her, watching the movie and eating popcorn. And one thing that you need to know at this point and in this moment, she's just been laughing. Like, she's laughing on the street. She was laughing in the bumper car. She's laughing during the movie. I don't know if there was some sort of note where it was like, people love to see you just open mouth laughing, but she's just constantly like head thrown back, just being adorable Rachel McAdams, laughing it up, just laughing at little Abner. I'm like, is this a children's movie? What's even happening that they're there and making out? It's giving Seinfeld making out during Schindler's List. Like, what is going on? So now after the movie, Ian No Name are like, all right, we're taking off. And Ryan and Rachel decide to walk home. That was fun, she declares. And she says she hasn't seen a movie in ages, not since she was a kid. And he's like, what? She goes, well, I'm busy. I have a strict schedule. I do this, I do that. And remember, her dad has more money than God, as E from Entourage said. So yeah, she's busy and he's trash. She's like, I don't just lay around all day watching movies and eating bonbons. I'm in my Latin studies. I'm doing this. I'm like taking etiquette classes. I'm blah, 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 blah. And after revealing her long-winded schedule, he's like, wow. She's like, well, this is all for my path to college. Like, I want to go to Sarah Lawrence's. Those are the colleges that we want to go to. And he's like, we? What do you mean by we? Who's we? She's like, Mom and Daddy. Daddy. Also a red flag. Adult women that refer to their fathers as daddy. She says, we decide everything together. Well, the important things. He says, okay, well, I'm just trying to figure out what you do for fun. You do things you have to do, but what about what you want? She's like, I just told you. He goes, I don't know. This just surprises me. I figured you were free. I am free. You don't seem like it. He then walks to the middle of the intersection. Because remember, it's late at night. That children's movie was seemingly on at 10 p.m. It's probably around midnight. Everyone in the 40s has curfew. They're all home. Not a single person out and about. And he lays in the middle of the street, like in the four-way center. And he's like, I used to do this with my dad. We would come and lay in the middle of the street, and we would watch the lights change. What does that even mean?
I'm speechless.
She's like,
that's cheap entertainment, I guess.
Cheap entertainment and also just, I don't know, danger zone. And she's like, no, absolutely not. And he's like, you're fine. Just come lay down. She's like, absolutely not. But then she lays down. And afterwards, he says, you don't do what you want. She's like, fine, okay. Like, I'm pretty strict, or I do this, or I'm held into my boundaries. And of course, he's like, I get it, but does she want to lay down in the street? Like, she doesn't have to do this insane, unhinged thing just so you can prove a point about boundaries. There's real sort of like low-grade toxic male energy of something or other, that it's like, is this the worst thing ever? No. Like, is he going to hit her? Probably not. But, like, also trying to prove to her that she has instilled these bizarre boundaries around her life or is, like, so locked up into her own schedule and her own coded things. Okay, but, like, being like, oh, just dangerously lie in the middle of the street, that will let you be, quote, free, end quote. You can learn how to, like, break rules. It's not it exactly either, Ryan Gosling. You know what I mean? They lay down. She's laughing, but she's also uncomfortable. What if a car comes? We die. What? She's like, no, relax. You just need to relax. He's like, no, seriously, though. Tell me things. She goes, I love to paint. There's this tender moment about her describing how she feels free, and it's how her love to ultimately see things the way that she wants to see things, and it's this tender moment, and in that breath of explaining her love of painting, honk! This car whips down the street. They jump up. They run to the sidewalk. She's laughing, of course, almost maniacally, having a total meltdown. The car, by the way, never even hit the brakes, just laid on the horn, was willing to crash directly into them.
It was a punitive honk.
Exactly. It was like, I will hit you. Do you want to dance with me? Sure. Now, here, he leads her back to the center of the intersection, and they dance. They have a tender moment where they dance. And he starts, and she says, you're a terrible singer, but I like this song. Guys, I don't know if you can feel it, but they're in love already. Duh. They don't know anything about each other. And then she paints and has a strict schedule. This is the first conversation they've ever had. And they are 2 14s out of 10s coming together to give us the most powerful bond Lev will ever see on film. The end. Kidding. So we cut back to James Garner telling the story to Gena Rowlands. And they fell in love, didn't they? She said. He goes, yes, they did. And she goes, go on. So now we see that they spend every waking hour together. James Garner then mansplains that when he said every waking hour together, he says, that means inseparable. James, we know. They're smearing ice cream on each other. They're riding bikes. They're making out. They're laughing, having the time of their lives. And Rachel McAdams arrives at Ryan Gosling's place, and he is on the porch reading poetry of Walt Whitman. Because, guys, I don't know if you know, he's actually much deeper than you maybe think. And he's reading this poetry, and his father is sitting on the porch with him, played by Pulitzer-winning playwright Sam Shepard. They didn't mess around with their casting. So Sam Shepard is there. And she says, so nice to meet you, Mr. Calhoun, a.k.a. And he goes, no, please. You can call me Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright Sam Shepard. And she's like, you're right. And she joins them on the porch of a home that looks like it's owned by someone who works in a lumber yard but doesn't has the money of God. It's like a nice house, but it's to show like he's fine. It's obviously just him and his dad, but he's not my father has more money than God, obviously. And she brought a gift, a painting of the trees by the swamp or the bay. I don't understand children's ages or bodies of water, apparently. Is it a bay? Is it a river? Is it the ocean? An inlet? But she paints it. And she asks, what are you reading? And he says, oh, I was just reading poetry from Walt Whitman. And Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright Sam Shepard says, he had a stutter. And Ryan Gosling's like, stammer! It wasn't a stutter, it was a stammer. He's like, whatever. We couldn't understand a damn thing he was saying. So I told him to read poetry out loud. And it wasn't pretty, but after a while, that stutter or stammer went away. And Ryan Gosling is like, Dad, unbelievable. She doesn't need to know that. Unbelievable. And I'm like, no, that's a nice thing for her to learn about you, that you overcame something.
Yeah.
So Sam Shepard says, would you guys like breakfast? Do you guys want breakfast? It's clearly nighttime. It is dark outside. And Rachel McAdams goes, breakfast for dinner? I mean, her mind is blown by this concept. Maybe this was a thing that did not happen in the 40s, but it is reminiscent of Daisy Edgar Jones seeing syrup packets form a triangle in the film Twisters to understand how a 3D rendering of a tornado would take place, as if math and science was created just before her eyes. That is Rachel McAdams understanding that you can eat breakfast at dinner time. And Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright Sam Shepard goes, yeah, you can have pancakes any time of day, and walks inside. I bet he was probably like, can we change these lines? And they were like, nope, you've got to say you can have pancakes any time of day.
He was dying inside.
James Garner pops back in with some narration. He was a country boy. She was from the city. She had the world at her feet. And while he didn't have 2 dimes to rub together, it didn't matter. And we see them running into the ocean. And he says to her, what are we doing? And she says, again, let me just say this again. What are we doing? As in, like, what is our relationship? It's summer. I'm in love with you. What is this? What's happening? And she says, do you think in another life I could have been a bird? And he's like, what? Fair enough. What? Question mark, exclamation point. And she says, like reincarnation. He goes, I don't know. I'm not really sure. I mean, no, what? And she goes, say I'm a bird. And he's like, I won't do it. Say I'm a bird. And he says, you're a bird. And then they kiss. And she says, say you're a bird. And he says, if you're a bird, then I'm a bird. Actual dialogue in this film. A larger representation of her just needing to be free, like I'm a bird in another life. But Ryan Gosling is setting me on the path to fly away and be a nourished woman, thanks to his love. That night, they're dancing to a banjo hoedown on her front porch, his front porch. 20 people are just playing. Rachel McAdams dances with Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright Sam Shepard. They're swimming in the watering hole. They're swinging on the rope. She's scared, again, maniacally laughing. I'm scared, but laughing about it. And everyone's pressuring her. Even Eve from Entourage is like, just jump into the water. And Ryan Gosling is like, do it. And they're all bullying her until she finally swings and jumps. He also teaches her how to drive. And then James Garner in this voiceover is like, they fought all the time. And you see them literally on the street arguing about something to the point where she slaps him, but then he grabs her and kisses her. Again, red flag sort of energy of this kind of like, it'll be fine, because even though she slapped him and is trying to run away, he pulled her back for the romance of it all and grabbed her and embraced her and kissed her. Their relationship is crazy. And that's the thing. James Garner says they fought all the time, but they also were crazy about each other. I'm like, sounds dangerous. So now Rachel McAdams gets dropped off and goes running into the house. But as she's running, she hears her dad. Rachel? She slams up against the door, shocked that her father, who's played by David Thornton, by the way, married to Cyndi Lauper.
Whoa.
The casting. And she goes, Daddy, I didn't see you there. The camera turns to face Mr. Cyndi Lauper, who's in pajamas with cufflinks because, remember, he has more money than God, and a deep blood red robe of silk, a twirled villain mustache, and a cigar. Bring him to the house on Sunday. I want to meet that young man. She goes, okay. We cut to that Sunday, and it's just a long table outside. You can see people in the background, playing, I don't know, badminton or something. Things that rich people would do in the 40s. And everyone is in all white. They're in white linens, and they're in pinstripes, and they're in silks, and everyone's wearing white, and they're all at this giant outdoor table. Now, sitting there are all the rich people, unknown rich people, and her father, Mr. Cyndi Lauper, and her mother, played by Joan Allen, sitting at the other end of the table. Also seated at the table, right next to Ryan Gosling, is E from Entourage and his no-name girlfriend, who clearly, in that scenario, she, no name, is a Richie McRich, and E from Entourage, also trash who works at the lumberyard with Ryan Gosling. So I don't know why everyone is acting like Rachel McAdams and Ryan Gosling can't be together. You've embraced E from Entourage, but maybe it's because that's not their daughter. Who knows? But he's sitting there in a black polo shirt. So, of course, he stands out like a poor thumb. Everyone's wearing white and neutrals and beige, and he's wearing a disgusting black polo. And they ask him, one random rich person is like, and what do you do? And he says, oh, I work at the lumberyard with E from Entourage, who's sitting literally right next to me, who you've embraced, but is wearing pinstripes, so he's better than me. And they go, oh, that's lovely, dear. Someone says, how much would you make at a job like that? And he goes, I make 40 cents an hour, but I don't need a lot, and I save most of it. Joan Allen, disgusted by him, is like, let's eat. She then says, well, if things are pretty serious between you two, which it seems they are, what are you going to do after the summer? And Ryan says, well, Charleston is only a couple hours away. I think it'll be easy to see each other. And she goes, oh, well, Rachel McAdams is going to Sarah Lawrence. Didn't she tell you? And she turns to him. She goes, I just got the letter. I was going to tell you. He's like, it's okay. And then Joan Allen goes, well, Sarah Lawrence is in New York. And you can tell she's so proud to drop that bomb on Ryan Gosling. And Rachel just glares at her mom. And Ryan Gosling goes, oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know where it was. And you can see him just instantly deflated. Her father, Mr. Cyndi Lauper, changes the subject. He's like, let's move on from that. Anyways, how about this joke I've got to tell? We cut to the parents watching as Ryan and Rachel jump off of a boat and make out. And Joan Allen is not happy about it. She's like, that boy is not good enough for our daughter. Energy. That night, Rachel has ridden her bike to Ryan's house. A house, by the way, that we're seeing sort of at nighttime, but the lights are on. And it's the first time that I look at it, I'm like, oh, wow, this is clearly like a set piece because literally wind could blow it over with a single breath. You can just see how light it is. Like, I've seen more weight in CGI'd Disney characters in live-action remakes of classics. You know what I mean? Where you're just like, wow, that house is just going to fall right over. They immediately embrace, and they're making out. And he says, I want to take you someplace. Do you want to go and be in a private place? And she says yes. And he takes her to this derelict, borderline falling apart murder house with a beautiful view of the water. And he leads her inside. Apparently it's the Windsor Plantation, which was built in 1772. And it's in disrepair, but it's gigantic. And he's lit it full of candles. And he says, one day I'm going to buy it. And I'm going to fix it up myself. And she starts being like, well, what are you going to do with it? And he goes, oh, do you want to say in this? And she goes, yeah, I want a white house. I want blue shutters. And I want a room over the river so I can paint. And I'm like, oh, my God, that's a river? Again, what are bodies of water? Because if you had said that, if you had been like, held a gun to my head, river would have been 100 bodies of water down. Okay? Revealed to be, quote, river, end quote. And he goes, anything else? And she goes, I want a big old porch to watch the sun go down. And he says, okay, promise? I promise. She then sits at a perfectly tuned, abandoned murder piano and starts playing chopsticks. And then they face each other. And then they slowly undress because this is at the point where it's like they are so deeply in love. And you think, wow, okay, finally they're going to bang. Or they've already been banging. Or what's going on even right now? But then she keeps talking and she's like in her head. And she's like, I don't know what we're doing. What's going on? And he just says, I love you. And she says, I love you too. And in that moment, E from Entourage busts into the door of the murder house. And Rachel McAdams' parents are going crazy looking for her. The cops are out looking because they don't know where she is. And, oh, she's been gone all summer. You haven't seen her at all. But now all of a sudden, because she's dating some hot poem-reading dirtbag, you're like, it's a problem. So they, of course, rush home. And we see the cops in their sort of London-style cab cars outside. And she's screaming at her parents, you sent the police for me! And they're like, it's 2 a.m, Joan Allen yells. And thank God you're all right. And Ryan Gosling starts to be like, well, and they're like, shh. We need to speak to Rachel alone. The dad walks the cops out. And Ryan Gosling says, it's not her fault. I lost track of time. And he's like, why don't you sit here and wait? I've got to go talk to my daughter in the other room. Joan Allen, meanwhile, is enraged, and you can hear her screaming. Ryan's sitting in the chair. He can overhear everything. And Joan Allen is like, you're going to throw your life away for trash? So hurtful. Ryan is so devastated. He can hear Joan Allen, and it's like, trash, 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 trash. And Rachel screams back, you're not going to tell me who to love. And even her dad is like shaking his head. And in the wise words from Ariel in The Little Mermaid, commandeered recently by Taylor Swift for a song title, she says, but Daddy, I love him. You are 17. You don't know anything about love. That's what Joan Allen says. And she turns to Joan Allen. And in front of her father, she says, oh, and you do? You don't look at Daddy the way I look at Ryan Gosling. I'm like, damn.
That is, how long has she been holding that one in?
Totally. Meanwhile, Ryan Gosling is outside and she runs to him. You're leaving? She's like, that was humiliating and I'm so sorry. And he's like, it's all right. It's all right. She's like upset. She's starting to cry. And he's like, breathe. And he's like, I'm going to go. I'm going to go. She's like, no, stay. I feel bad. Just stay. He's like, no, you know what? You're going away. And I'm happy that you are, that you're doing that. And you have so much ahead for you. And I don't. I won't have fancy things. I don't have nice things. I don't have that life. I'm not going to. And that all is not going to happen for me. And she's like, come to New York. Come and be with me. And he says, what am I going to do in New York? She's like, we don't have to figure it out tonight. He says, we don't have to figure it out tonight. And she's like, wait, are you breaking up with me? He says, I don't see how this is going to work. She's like crying, please don't do this. You don't mean it. You don't mean it. She shoves him and they fight. And he's like, what do you want? Like, you're leaving. This isn't going to work. And she screams, I hate you. I assume at this point in the theaters, because I don't remember, people must have been sobbing, seeing our most powerful love ever shown on screen, falling apart at the seams, which is also so selfish of him in a way where it's like, why can't you go to New York? You're just working in Lumberyard.
You have lumberyards in New York.
You're making her choose you, which is unfair. And like, you can choose to go too and make a life for yourself. Ugh! So now James Garner is telling the story to our Gena Rowlands.
Gena,
oh my God, see? It's like ingrained in my brain for 100 years. Gena Rowlands. And she says, Ryan should have told those parents to go to hell and stick it where the sun don't shine. And James Garner's like, you're right, he should have. And we cut back to Rachel McAdams. And, her summer house that they've been staying at is insane. She gets up from bed. She's been crying. She goes to the dining room where her mom is sitting at the head of a 20-person dining room table. It looks like a dining hall for an Ivy League dorm. You know what I mean? Like, it just looks insane. And she storms up to her mother, and is like, I'm so angry, Mom. She's like, we're not leaving for another week. And Joan Allen says, we're leaving today. And she's like, no, we're not. She goes, Rachel, you're going whether you like it or not. She throws a newspaper in her mom's face. Meanwhile, Rachel McAdams rides her bike angrily to Eve from Entourage. And she's like, I can't find Ryan Gosling. I went to his house. I came here to the lumberyard. I can't find him. And he's like, he's out on an errand. He had to go deliver a piece of wood or something, which is like not a thing, I believe. And she's like, but I'm leaving town. And he's like, when? She's like, right now. She's like, tell him I love him and that I'm sorry. And he's like, look, Rachel, it's over. Leave it alone. Meanwhile, her mom rides up in her car and is screaming from the backseat, get in this car. And he says, look, if he wants to talk to you, he'll write to you. I was up with him all night. He's devastated, but he knows it's over. but I'll tell him what you said. And if he wants to talk to you, he'll write to you. She's like, okay, but please tell him. Tell him I love him. He's like, I'll tell him. She hugs E from Entourage, director of Gotti, which has 0% on Rotten Tomatoes. Goodbye, she says. Good luck in your directorial debut. I don't think it was. I think he's directed other stuff. But still, good luck. And of course, as the car is driving away, and like a butler is loading the bike onto the back of Joan Allen's car, Ryan arrives 15 seconds later. No way they didn't pass each other on the street. That's insane. There's only one way in and out of the lumberyard. He arrives 15 seconds later. And he runs to his car because Eve from Entourage is like, she was just here. He runs to his car to chase her. He gets to her house. The gate is locked up. It's as if no one was ever in that mega mansion right on the beach. It's over. O-V-E-R. We cut back to James Garner reading to Gena, saying a summer romance ends for all kinds of reasons. But when all is said and done, they have one thing in common. They are shooting stars, a spectacular moment of light in the heavens, a fleeting glimpse of eternity. And in a flash, they're gone. Whatever. Anyways, back to Ryan Gosling, who's sulking on his porch while his dad chops wood. And he immediately writes her a letter. Immediately just gushing, I'm sorry, I love you, I'll do whatever it takes to be with you. And he mails it. But you know who gets the mail? Joan Allen. She opens the mailbox, she sees this letter from Ryan Gosling, and she hides it. Ryan writes a letter every day for a year. Every day. 365 letters. Every single one intercepted by Joan Allen. After a year of silence, he writes a farewell letter to say, I have no choice but to move on. And in his final letter, he's like, me and E from Entourage, you might remember him from the Pussy Posse back in the 90s with Leonardo DiCaprio. We're packing our bags and we're moving to Atlanta. Once they're in Atlanta for unknown reasons, they enlist and join the army as World War II breaks out. The two are overseas and they're deployed to Patton's Third Army in Europe. And as they're on a routine moment, they're bombed. We see this one moment of planes flying overhead. They're in the snow. They're walking. Bombs are dropped. And E from Entourage is buried in the snow from the blast. 0% for directing Gotti on Rotten Tomatoes. E from Entourage. A member of the elite squad known as the Pussy Posse back in the 90s. His longtime friend Leonardo DiCaprio alongside Lucas Haas and Tobey Maguire, and sometimes even David Blaine was included in the Pussy Posse. E is dead. Devastating moment.
Oh, God.
Meanwhile, Rachel McAdams is just flourishing in her third year of college. She's volunteering as a nurse's aide in her free time, and she sits up this man in this giant, giant hallway in which she says all of these men remind her of Ryan Gosling for various reasons. And this man in a giant body cast, she just rolls him up. His legs are wrapped up, his torso's in a giant cast. He's got a neck injury, he's got black eyes, and yet somehow still hot. We instantly realize it's James Marsden. Hottie McHot, who's, a shell of a human being. And even though he's a shell of a human being, he's like, she's hot. And he says, I noticed you're not married. Can I take you out? And she's like, excuse me, shell of a human being? Like, you're barely alive. And he goes, on a date. You should know I'm an excellent dancer, and my intentions are completely honorable. And she says, okay, Casanova, let's just get you better, and then we can talk about a date. Time passes, And she, along with her girlfriends, now see a dreamy, hottie McHot James Marsden in his military uniform next to a fancy convertible car, i.e. rich, is what they're saying. And he's like, I'm all better, he announces. How about that date? And she instantly is like, I'm in love. And how could she not? Hot James Marsden, he's rich, he's smart and fun and sophisticated, and he's super rich, So she's like, ugh, you're exact opposite of everything that Ryan Gosling was. And they're out with her parents one night, and her parents are cutting it up on the dance floor when James Marsden announces that he is exactly the type of man that her parents want her to end up with. And he says, I feel like that's why you won't marry me, because you want to defy your parents. And she's like, oh, really? And he goes, well, here, but let me just say, if you do marry me, that ends a lifelong battle, which, lifelong battle, I'm like, what, she's 20? A lifelong battle of defiance. And it's why you're not going to marry me. And she goes, well, what are we going to do? She says. And he goes, well, you know what? If you do marry me, your parents will always know the unhappiness that you feel for not being able to disappoint them. And she, of course, laughs it up. And then he proposes, will you marry me? She says yes. Everyone celebrates. Everyone's ecstatic. She says yes. But, of course, you know who she thought about? Ryan Gosling. Meanwhile, Ryan has returned from war. He returns to his father, Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright Sam Shepard. And Sam immediately is like, look what I did. I sold our house. You have the money now to buy your dream house. You've got the GI Bill. You've got this cash. Go do it. And he goes, but Dad, where are you going to live? And he's like, with you, dummy. We're going to move into that house. I'm going to help you build it. He's like, okay. So he looked at the house and he saw one thing. Rachel McAdams. And he decides, I'm going to build this house from the ground up. In that moment, he heads to Charleston to go over his plans, the blueprints for the house. And while he's there on the bus, he sees Rachel McAdams on the street. He literally, similar to just jumping on the Ferris wheel, is like, stop the bus. And the guy's like, can't stop. We got to go to the depot. And he literally goes to the front of the bus and he just opens the door and jumps off the bus. Wow. He starts running down the street. He can't find her. He, of course, conveniently stops right in front of a restaurant with giant windows in it. And he turns and he sees her. And he's like, Rachel McAdams. But you know who else is there? James Marsden. And he sees her kiss James Marsden. And he's devastated. Like a single tear glides down his cheek. And he decides, I'm going to build that house to win her back. And he's like, he went mad. He became this one-man machine where he didn't sleep and he didn't eat. And all he did was work on that house. Meanwhile, James Garner and Gena Rowlands are having lunch. We check in once in a while. We see how they're doing. They're in love, but does she know it? It's unclear. Anyways, Ryan's dad, Pulitzer playwright, a winner, Sam Shepard, has passed. And now it's just him. He only has the house. And he continues his insane rage. He puts all of his grief now also into building that house. And the house is done. And he attempts to sell it. People come. They offer too little. They offer too much. They don't feel right. He can't do it. He says no. And at night, he rows on the creek. He rows on the creek? Is it a river? Is it a creek? Which one is it? Where's the continuity? And he bangs a local woman named Martha Shaw, some random woman that would come over who's beautiful, and he would bang. And this Martha woman is, of course, in her feels. Fair enough. She's like, I feel like you look in my eyes and you see someone else. And he says to her, I can't give you what you want. I'm a broken man. And it's like, number one, heal yourself. Number two, It's not okay to treat someone that way and then pine for someone else. Give some respect to Martha and stop destroying others. Go to therapy. Meanwhile, Rachel McAdams is trying on her wedding dress in front of 100 women that we've never seen before, her alleged friends. And her wedding is the social highlight of the season. Now, when our sweet Ryan Gosling had completed his house, the local paper came and did a cover story on it because it is this old, beautiful plantation, how it had been left to be a derelict pile of dirt, and he rebuilt it from the ground up and has brought life back to this beloved plantation, which, like, beloved probably held slaves. Like, we don't need to praise that. So it's been covered in the papers, and she is looking at a newspaper because on the front page is how Rachel McAdams is getting married. And you would think Ryan Gosling would see that. Like, don't you go and look up your little photo in the paper? And Joan Allen is having a meltdown in a positive way because the wedding is being covered in the newspapers. She's borderline seizuring and convulsing, and it's like the biggest thing ever because it is the social highlight of the season, this wedding. And she's literally like foaming at the mouth. Like, but also, of course it is. Like, I don't know why she's acting so shocked. If you're like the two richest families in town and your kids are getting married, like, of course it's going to be the social function of the city. And she's acting like this is shocking news that it's being covered. Yeah. And she's literally convulsing with excitement as Rachel reads out loud, "Oh my God, the governor is coming to our wedding." And I'm like, how do you not know that the governor is coming to your wedding and you're finding out through the newspaper? Joan Allen's head explodes as she announces that the governor is coming. And with it, she unfolds the news because, again, she's holding it in its half. She opens the newspaper, and with a low-grade twist a la M. Night Shyamalan, Ryan Gosling is in the paper with his house. She's stunned to silence. Dear Allen looks at the paper and sees the photo of Ryan Gosling, now with a beard, sort of like, quote, depressed Ryan Gosling, but still, quote, hot AF, end quote. And she literally says, "Oh, dear." And Rachel faints. She faints in her wedding dress. That night, she's in the bathtub. She's got her veil on, the newspaper on the ground next to it, and she's turning the water on and off with her foot. And do you know what she's doing? She is thinking. She's thinking, what does this all mean? The next day, she storms into her fiance's office. James Marsden, she goes, "I am so sorry. I should have called. But I was just thinking last night, I don't paint anymore. And I don't do it anymore. And it's something that I love. And it's a big part of me." She's like, or he said, "Okay, I mean, like, go paint." And she's like, "I will." And he's like, "Is everything okay? Like, what is going on with this little tantrum?" And she says, "I need to get away. I need to clear my head." And he says, "Should I be worried?" She goes, No, I don't think so. Are you all right?" Yeah, no, I'm fine." He's like, "Okay, go. Take your time. You know, you can be nervous before the big day. It totally makes sense." And she says, "No second thoughts. No second thoughts." And then she forces out, "I love you." And he goes, "Where are you going, by the way?" And she's like, "Seabrook. I used to spend summers there. Bye." And leaves. Meanwhile, Ryan Gosling is still working on the house. He's in the garage, making some furniture. He's bearded. You know, he's been drinking. He's shades of depressed, but still hot. It's a good look on him. And he sees her outside, dolled up. You know, "This is the first time I'm seeing you. I'm going to look hot AF." And she says, "Hey, I saw your picture in the paper and I wanted to see if you were okay." And he just stares at her. He's like in shock, just stares. "Are you okay?" And he just stares. And she goes, "Okay, well, okay." She takes a step back. She's like, I'm stupid. I'm stupid. I'm a stupid woman. I shouldn't have done this. I shouldn't have come." And she gets back into her car and she tears out. And he's still just standing there in shock. And she tears out, going like 100 miles per hour, 0 to 150, whips around so fast, tearing up grass. You see grass like flying up from the ground. And she immediately hits his fence. And he walks up to her window And he says, you want to come inside? And she goes, okay. Now we cut back to James Garner and Gena Rowlands. And she goes, I think I've heard this before. Maybe more than once. He's like, you have. But he's called to the doctor and he says, I'll finish the story when I return. I'll be right back. Why don't you sit here? And the nurse comes back and she says, why don't you go and play the piano? You love the piano. And she goes, I do? She goes, yes. She's like, I can read. And she's like, yes, you can read the music. You can go. She's like, I'm going to sit you there. Meanwhile, the new attending physician, who's, of course, young, goes over his chart and goes, wow, you've had 2 minor heart attacks in the last 18 months, which I'm like, ooh, yikes. And he's still taking his medication. They discuss how he reads to Gena Rowlands. And he says, I know you're doing a good deed and you care for her, but it won't help. And he goes, no, when I read to her, she remembers, not always. And he says, look, Alzheimer's is degenerative and she's not going to come back. It's only going to keep getting worse. I just don't want you to get your hopes up that there's going to be some sort of breakthrough. It only goes so far. And James Garner says, science only goes so far. And then comes God. Ooh.
Okay.
Meanwhile, she's playing the piano beautifully. And then she just stops. And he says, oh, I'm not there to change the page. And I'm like, is the doctor's office right off of the piano room? Like, what is this hospital old person home? Seemingly beautiful, by the way. And then she starts playing again. And the doctor says, oh, someone must have changed the page. And he goes, no, she's playing from memory. God, Ethan.
I could have swore you were going to say she was playing chopsticks.
Oh, I mean, she probably was, honestly. I didn't take note of that, but she probably was. You will know as our musical expert for the all spoiler recap.
Okay.
So now, back with our Rachel and Ryan moment, she's like, so I'm engaged to James Marsden, and she loves him. And he says, well, that's that. You marry James Marsden, and we can be friends, right? She says, right. So she stays, and they're drinking beer, and he's deeply pained that she's engaged and haunted by the memories. And he says, being in this house with you is so hard. He's like, remember, this is the room where we almost banged. It's just like hilarious thing to say. Remember right here when I almost banged you? So they go outside and they read poetry, and she describes their love as just like a couple of kids, but they loved each other so much. And she says, I should go. And they're standing at her car. And he says, can you come back tomorrow morning? I want to show you something. I want to show you a special place. And she says, okay. And Ryan stayed up all night thinking how he could lose her twice. That's what James Garner says, that all night he was stressed out about the next day. And in that moment, we're with James Garner, and his kids have come to visit. Mary Ellen and Maggie and the grandkids and their son named Edmund. And she feels awkward, and you can see her get real quiet because obviously she doesn't really recognize anyone. And they're like, how are you feeling? And how are you? And she's sort of overwhelmed, just sort of like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing right now. Where am I? Type energy. And she decides, like, I'm going to take my nap. And the nurse walks her away. And as she walks off, the kids are like, Dad, come home. She doesn't know you or us. And like, you're wasting your time. Just come home. We miss you. And I'm like, what? The kids are the villains. How dare you speak about your to be revealed your own mom that way? And like, your loving Ryan Gosling father is there to take care of your mother and is going to be with there. Like, it was so, what a shocking scene to have in this movie. I thought it hit so weird.
Yeah. I wonder what, yeah.
What is that? It was giving, the Birdcage where, their son, Val, is trying to change who they are for him to better his own life. It's like, no, your father's going to be there for your mother and take care of her, as you should be. And they are like, we'll take shifts. We'll all try and help. And he's like, no, this is my wife. This is my love. I am here with her until the end.
Yeah. That's what
And
you
the
did.
kids don't get it. And he says to them, your mother is my home. This is it. Meanwhile, James Marsden calls to check in on Rachel McAdams because he hasn't heard from her. Anything you want to tell me? She says, no, but I love you. I'll call you tomorrow. So the next day she shows up and he's making furniture, so skilled, so hot. And he says, well, we better get going. The rain is coming. So they go out on the river, creek, swamp, bay, whatever it is. And there are 1.2 million ducks on the water. And he's like, do you like it? She says, I love it. I mean, we get this overhead shot of the boat, and it's just so many ducks. It's almost like a horror film. Like you're waiting for those ducks to turn and kill them. But of course they don't. And she's like, it's like a dream. And he's like, want to feed them? And I'm like, feed all the ducks. This is when it happens. They're going to throw a piece of bread, and the ducks are going to go insane and kill Rachel McAdams.
Oh, I wish. Yes.
Doesn't happen, though.
Ah.
Go see Sphere when Queen Latifah gets attacked by 1 million jellyfish. It was giving me triggering vibes to that with all those ducks. And he says they're supposed to migrate, but they stay. Eventually they come back. They go to where they came from. He's like, I don't get it, but they all just come here. And she says to him, you're different. What do you mean? And she says, the way you look, everything. You look different too, but in a good way. She says, you're kind of the same, though, and I'm proud of you. Like, look, you did it. You really did it. Everything is beautiful, what you did here. And he says, I promised you I would. And in that moment, there's like a giant thing of thunder. And he says, we gotta go. And they start rowing to get home. And it starts pouring rain in that classic way only a rom-com rain can be, where it is a torrential downpour. It is going to drown all those ducks. That's how severe the rain coming down is. And they're laughing, and of course she's cackling, wide mouth, head back, laughing in the rain. And she leans back and she's shaking her hair like a golden retriever, and they make it to the dock. And she stomps onto the dock, running in the rain, and he pulls the boat up, and she stops on the dock, and she faces them, or him, excuse me. And she says, why didn't you write me? I waited for you for 7 years, and now it's too late. And he says, I wrote you 365 letters. I wrote you every single day for a year. And she's like, you wrote me? And he says, it wasn't over. It still isn't over. And she runs to him, and he picks her up, and they make out in the rain. It's literally on the poster of the movie. Ladies, advocate for yourselves, okay? You do not have to have your mom check the mail. You, too, can take the steps to the mailbox to get those letters, especially if he had said, I'll write to you. And then don't you want to wonder, wow, literally no mail ever arrives for me? Little Miss Rachel McAdams? Check the mailbox yourself. Get there before your mom. So obviously after that makeout, which makes its way all the way onto the promotional poster, they obviously bang. So they bang again, they bang in front of the fire, they bang in a chair, they bang on the floor, they bang and bang and bang. And they decide to make pancakes and ham, and it's daylight outside, and there's a knock at the door from Martha. And she sees the car, and she wants to come inside. And he gives her like a little kiss on the cheek as she arrives. And she says, she's the one, isn't she? Can I meet her? I would like to meet her. And he says, I don't think that's a good idea. And in that moment, Rachel McAdams comes to the door and is like, hey, I'm Rachel McAdams. Come inside. And she's like, are you sure? And she's like, yes, come in. I'm like, why? Why would you do that to this poor woman? Martha spends all day there. She ends up not leaving until nighttime. And as she's leaving, she's like, God, that Rachel McAdams is sensational. I'm glad I came here. I'm like, what is happening? And then she says, I have something to look forward to. And she kisses him goodbye. And Rachel watches her from the window. I'm like, oh my God. The bang tour continues. They bang here, they bang there.
Oh.
And next morning, he leaves her a note that says, I'm out to get breakfast. Follow the arrows on the floor. And she looks up, and from construction paper, notebook paper, he's cut out arrows that lead to the room next door. And in it is her own painting room. And she's wrapped in a blanket, naked basically, painting like she's never painted before. And in that moment, there's a knock at the door. And she assumes it's Ryan Gosling, even though, like, why would he knock at his own home? And she goes downstairs, wrapped in her blanket, and it's Joan Allen. James Marsden is on his way here. Your father spilled the beans. He's on his way. And her reaction is, tell me about the letters. Is it true? You watched me cry myself to sleep for months and months. And her mom is like, I'm sorry. You're sorry? Yes, I'm sorry. My entire life is ruined. And her mom says, yes, okay. I hid the letters, but don't be all dramatic about it. Take some responsibility. You came down here knowing exactly what you were doing. Oh, so now I'm a tramp? You are unbelievable. Get your clothes on. We're going for a drive. She's like, no. She's like, I might know you a little better than you think. And I don't want you waking up one morning thinking that if you'd known everything, you might have done something different. So Rachel McAdams gets dressed and they drive. And she drives Rachel McAdams in her beautiful rich person convertible or whatever. And they drive up and hide behind this giant dirt pile. It's basically a lumber yard, but for dirt. And there's this giant dirt pile, and she parks behind it, and she points out a man. And she says, look at him. That man right there, his broad shoulders, low-key hot. 25 years ago, he was really something. We were in love. Out of our minds in love. Rachel McAdams is like, wow. She says, but your grandfather was furious. We ran away together, and we didn't even make it to the next town before the police picked us up, and that was then. When I'm in this area, sometimes I stop, and I watch him, and I hide behind this giant dirt pile, and I look at him, and I wonder what would my life have been like if I had married that dirt pile man. Meanwhile, I'm like, 25 years ago. How old are they? What, are we losing the time frame? She should have been like 30 years ago or something. But anyways.
Yeah.
And so it's like, you know, the dummy, Hottie McConhot, who's just shoveling dirt, never noticed you 50 feet away in your fancy sports car, bright blue. Like a baby blue that pops because it's against a brown dirt pile. It's like the most beautiful sight to be seen. And she starts crying, Joan Allen. And she says, I love your father. And Rachel McAdams starts being, Mom, I know. And she goes, no, this is important. He's a wonderful man. And he is so good to me. And I don't deserve it. And I love him. And Rachel McAdams is like, Mom, I know. I believe you. And she wipes away a tear and she goes, this is embarrassing. I'm a stupid woman. It's crazy. And she stares back at the dirt pile man. But this time, we see him. He looks up. And he sees her. And she stares at him. And you wonder, like, does he recognize her? Does he know what's happening in this moment? But we also notice it's the actor Paul Johansson, a.k.a. Dan Scott from One Tree Hill. We have to now have a brief interlude for one of the greatest moments in TV. March 23rd, 2009. Dan Scott from One Tree Hill was the villain in One Tree Hill. His two sons were half brothers. They both were star basketball players, and they were always fighting, not only for their father's approval, but in their own friendships and relationships. And at one point, he needs a new heart, and he's in the hospital, and this villainous father is sitting in the wheelchair, Dan Scott. And next to him is a golden retriever, a service dog, you might think. And a man carrying a cooler that says human organ trips over the leash of the golden retriever, falling. The cooler flies out of his hands, and the heart, alongside fake ice, goes spilling out of the cooler onto the floor. Dan stands up, but too late. The golden retriever, a service dog, runs over and eats the heart in one bite and runs off. Anyways, back at home, Ryan Gosling is there seeing Joan Allen drop her off. He's sitting on the porch and she yells after Rachel McAdams, "Wait, wait." And she comes back, and out of the trunk, she pulls out all of the letters in a green bow. And she says, "I hope you make the right choice." She faces Ryan holding the letters. She tells James Marsden is here. She says, "I saw his car at the hotel. I've got to go figure this out." And he's like, "Well, I see you got my letters finally." And they laugh, always laughing. And he says, "What are you going to do?" And she says, "I don't know." And she's sort of shaking. She's like having to come with terms with what just happened over these days. She's holding the letters. And Ryan Gosling is like, "We're back to that? Like, the last couple of days happened." And she goes, "They happened, but they were irresponsible." And he's like, "How dare you? You make love to me, and then you go back to your husband and just say it. This is about money." And she's like, "I hate you for saying that." And he's like, "If you leave here, I hate you. And you're bored, and just stay with me." And she's like, "We're already fighting." And he goes, "Yes, we fight. We fight because I'm not afraid to hurt your feelings. This relationship is real, and we fight because we're passionate." And I'm like, "No, that's a red flag." And he says, "We have to work at this every day if we're going to be together. But I want you every day, forever, all of you. 30 years from now, 40 years from now, and if it's with that guy, go. But do not take the easy way out. Take the path with the red flags." And then he says, "You need to stop thinking about what I want, me, what I want, what your parents want." And she's like, "It's not that simple." "What do you want?" And she says, "I have to go." She drives home. She's crying. She's out of her mind. She almost hits a car. Again, the car just veers off, doesn't even act like it was almost in a head-on collision. She gets home. She rips open the letters. She reads every single letter. 365 letters. She gets back home. She fixes her hair. Meanwhile, Gena Rowlands is loving the story, but she feels so sad. He tells her this poem from Walt Whitman, and she says, "I think I know him." And she says, "I think you did." And they're sitting on the dock, and they go inside to have this beautiful candlelit dinner. And she looks out the window at the bay, and they sit down, and they cheers to you. And she goes, "What happens in the story? Which one did she choose?" And we cut to James Marsden reacting to the news of what just happened. And he says, "Okay, look, I have 3 choices. 1, shoot him. 2, kick the crap out of him. 3, leave you. But all of these are no good because none of these options get me you. And in spite of everything you just told me, I love you." And she says, "I love you too." And he says, "I meant what I said when I gave you that ring." And she tells him, "My feelings are one thing, and my feelings with Ryan are one thing, and my feelings with you are one thing." And I'm like, red flag. Well, do you think it's odd that his reaction is just like, "Oh, the love of your life, days before our wedding, you just like had Bangtown for like multiple days, and now you're like, sorry, I think, but I also don't know." I'd be like, what is going on?
That's not how that would go down. I don't.
It's a tough call. Days before a wedding, allegedly. And he says, I don't want to convince my fiance to be with me. I want you to choose me. And James Garner says, they lived happily ever after. And Gena Rowlands goes, who did? Who did? And then she says, of course, yes. And we cut to Rachel McAdams with her suitcases and Ryan Gosling standing on the balcony in a blanket. And the swelling of really uplifting music starts coming in. As she runs to him, they embrace. And Gena Rowlands says, I remember now, it was us. I remember now, us. And she's crying, and they kiss. And he says, I love you, my angel, James Garner. What happened to me? And he says, you went away for a little while. How much time? He goes, last time I had you for 5 minutes. And he puts on some jazz music, and they dance, and so sweet. And she says, how are the children? He says, they were here today, the grandkids too. Time flies, she says. Tell them I love them. And he says, I will. She says, remember the story you were reading? Do you think I could hear that again tonight? Can we go back to that place, to some place? And he says, not tonight. Not tonight. Not tonight, my darling. And she sort of all of a sudden stands back and is like, who are you? Why are you calling me darling? No. And, he, of course, tries to lean forward and put his arms up. Who are you? What are you doing? Don't come near me. And starts having a total meltdown. The nurse comes in. They kind of pull him out of the room a little bit. She's having a total freak down. She doesn't know who they are. She starts screaming. The doctor comes in. James Garner is sobbing. They sedate her. That night, he's looking through a photo book of him and her. And we didn't have the CGI technology, I guess, from The Notebook as we do today, where they didn't morph his face with Ryan Gosling. It's all photos of James Garner young. And the next day, we see that he's had a heart attack overnight from the experience, and he's been taken to the hospital. Meanwhile, Gena Rowlands is confused. She's no longer in her beautiful place, but in a corral of old people in wheelchairs, and she's eventually back home, but it's clear that her health is all of a sudden also taken a hit and in a severe decline overnight. And James Garner sneaks out of his room. He gets up. He's back in his room. And the nurse is like, what are you doing? Where are you going? And he says, I'm just going for a walk. And she says, you can't do that. You need to be in bed. And she goes, are you going to go see your beloved? And he says, I miss her. And she goes, look, you've got to go back to your room. He's like, I can't. She goes, look, you need to go back to your room. I'm going to go get my coffee. So I won't be here for a while. So don't do anything foolish. She walks off. Of course, James Garner is a man, so he just stands there like, what was that about? And then he notices that her cup of coffee is fresh on the desk. He puts his hand on it. Hot. So he goes to her room. And he says, hi, sweetheart. I'm so sorry I just got here. She was like, I was afraid. I didn't know where you were. I didn't know what was happening. And he says, I will always come back. I will always be here for you. She says, what's going to happen when I can't remember anything anymore? What will you do? And he says, I'll be here. I'll never leave you. And she says, I need to ask you something. Do you think our love can create miracles? And he says, yes, I do. That's what brings me back to you every single time. Do you think our love could take us away together? And he says, I think our love can do anything we want it to. And they kiss. And he says, I love you. She says, I love you. He crawls into her bed and says goodnight. The twist being that 2 elderly adults can fit in a twin-size hospital bed comfortably. And the next day, the nurse walks into the room, and she realizes they're both dead. They died in their sleep overnight, complete and whole, and in love, in their twin-size bed. The end. And the credits roll.
Wow.
Ethan, The Notebook, how do you feel?
I have so many questions.
Yeah. Shoot.
The first, the title. What is?
Well, so
Did I
he's
miss it?
reading like this book that he wrote of their love. But it took me
Uh,
until sort of the end to really actually put it together as like, oh, the Notebook, because he's like seemingly reading like a bound book that he wrote of their love, that he wrote their love story and he reads it to her all the time to try and remind her.
okay.
Nothing about her children, nothing about anything. It's just their love story, classic love story. And at first I was like, is that a reference to the letters? I kept thinking, oh, the letters, that's the
Yeah.
Notebook. And then I was like, oh no, he's reading from, quote, a notebook. But not,
Okay.
it's a book.
Yeah. Okay. I loved it.
It's definitely like I get how it would have word of mouth because it's like Ryan Gosling and Rachel McAdams, they have great chemistry. You are like, yeah, I buy it. I can
Yeah. Yeah.
see the love between them. I think there's like a real affection for it. Obviously, it was like the return of sort of more schmaltzy, other sort of style movies of that manner. It opened the floodgates. But, I hadn't seen it since it was in theaters because I was never like, God, I just feel like I'm going to throw the Notebook on. But often when we're reading the bios of various Bachelor contestants and it's like, what's your favorite movie? 7 out of 10 times it's the Notebook, So I
Wow.
know people really love this movie. So
All right. I'm not sure I'm gonna watch it, but I
fair
feel
enough. Like, do you
feel like
need to? Yeah.
I think it would be a step down from that rendition. So
Well, especially because when you watch the Notebook, are you going to get an aside about One Tree Hill? I don't think you will. So keep that in mind, everyone. That's,
yeah,
come for the spoiling, stay for an iconic heart being eaten by a retriever. So, anyways, Ethan Stoller, I so appreciate
Julia,
you.
thank you so much.
It's
It
been
was my
great.
pleasure.
Of course, check out episode 102 of the All Spoiler Recap, No Exit, which is a super fun one. And Ethan, of course, will join us down the road again. By all means, go ahead and subscribe, leave a review. Let your friend that loves the Notebook that we did a really impactful, deeply emotional recap that they might be interested in. And of course, I'll see you again on Monday.